These are Bedrock Clogs. They might have a more specific name. They don't make a lot of models though, so I think you'll be able to figure it out. It's a US company. I believe that these ones are made in South Korea though. All their sandal models are made in the US. We'll start with the weight. And what are we on? In American sizing, we are 1 pound, 1 ounce for both. Wow, it's light. And then for one, wait, that's not right, 13 ounces. Oh, excuse me, 1 pound, 10 ounces. Sorry, I can't see too well. And then for the rest of the world, we're at 751 grams for both and 375 for one. So fairly light, but not super light. These are barefoot type of shoes where there's no lift from the front to the back. The outsole, I've had these for about 100 miles. These are the Vibram Mega Grips. I think they only have 2 outsoles. They only offer one on the clogs. The sandals, though, they have the XS Trek, I think is what it's called, and that's like a harder rubber. This is a softer rubber. Typically with softer rubber, you get better grip because it's more conforming to the environment and gets better like stickiness to the ground. And then usually a softer type of rubber compound is more comfortable to stand on. I will say though, for being a less dense outsole, and the Mega Grip's obviously designed for grippiness, I don't know what it is about the Mega Grip. I think it has a fairly long lifespan too. And I do think I have evidence to show that. There is a hiker that they didn't use the clogs, but they used the sandals, but they used the same Vibram Mega Grip outsole. I actually asked Bedrock, and they got through the Pacific Crest Trail, which I believe is more than 1,000 miles. I would say that's pretty good for a barefoot shoe. And on that note, these are also resolable. So that if you send them to their place in Colorado, I believe, they'll resole them when they wear out. So these are some type of shoe that you could get a long lifespan out of. And I don't know, again, I don't know what it is about the Mega Grip compound, but I just feel like perhaps maybe it's just not shaving off as much rubber, you know, every time you cause abrasion by sliding, you know, against the material. So I think it's a great outsole, in other words, especially if you're wanting more tread. And unlike other shoes that put tons and tons of like micro type of tread on them, it doesn't collect. I have not had a situation where this was like these ones, they collect mud like nothing. I have not had these collect a ton of mud or anything like that, as bad as the others, just because the tread is not as thick. So I would, you know, guess that you could possibly get about 1,000 miles or more out of this outsole, which I'd say for a barefoot shoe is pretty good, because typically the barefoot shoe, you're already making a compromise in terms of you're trying to get a lighter weight boot that simulates more walking on your foot, that type of thing. So you usually get a thinner outsole anyways. But yeah, no, I think for a barefoot shoe, ironically, that XS Trek might be one of the most durable type of barefoot shoe, like durability in terms of an outsole compared to everything else out there. So, you know, something like the Vivo Barefoot, which I also recommend, which I do recommend for like a work type of situation. This is like, I think 11 millimeters combined, but it's a very soft rubber. I've only worn these for about 500 miles, and I don't think these would last 1,000 in comparison to these. So yeah, I would say the outsole is a 5 out of 5. I can't give it a higher recommendation for that. The upper, let's switch to that. I guess we'll switch to kind of the glue first. I'm not sure if these are a direct attach. Obviously here you have the foam layer, which I believe is polyurethane. So that entire footbed's polyurethane in there, you know, down to the front. So it's a very simple shoe. This company has made sandals And I think they have only started making the Clog a few years ago. So you kind of have to come from the mindset that they came from being a sandal company to what they are now. And I do think that's what leads to the cons with the Clog. This one, I read a lot of early cases of delamination with this. Again, it's something that I don't think they would have to face with the sandal, because if you look at this design here, where you have it stitched to the side here, like just imagine this without the leather and just with the strapping. It's not too dissimilar from their sandal design. I think the only thing with the sandal is this piece of like hair tie or whatever the heck fabric this is, this circle of paracord, for example, just stitches down to the front and then usually hooks around that big toe. So you don't have much of a different design compared to the sandals. And so, but that's for a good reason, because this is a really awesome connection system that I'll go in later. But the problem I do think that there is with it, because they didn't use leather before, is I think there was a lot of issues with the delamination. Again, there's direct attach, where it's a type of bonding with the leather in the midsole there, and then there's also gluing. So, but even this could be direct attach from here to here, and this part, the bumper here, could be glued. The leather could be glued underneath there, because you can definitely feel the leather under here, as opposed to, I don't think it would go that far under there, because you can see back here, it's just sort of slid in between those layers there. So again, I'm not too sure. I don't think you would have too many issues with the leather under here, but I do think that there's been some type of delamination problems probably around here or here. So I think that's always worth mentioning, that one, you should have some type of, well, you could possibly contact the company, because I think they have a pretty good warranty if it starts delaminating like that within the first few years. You could also buy certain types of glue. I don't recommend shoe glue. I do have another one I use that I recommend that would reattach it if it sort of broke apart. With the leather conditioners, though, one thing that's always worth noting is Obanoff's Leather LP is a wax-based conditioner. Waxes can get under, if it is glue, waxes can get under the glue layer and delaminate it that way. So it's something that's worth noting, especially if you're going to put the wax along the layer like that. There are water-based ones that are much less likely to cause delamination. So it still conditions the shoe, but doesn't necessarily get the waxes under that layer. Although I will say that wax-based typically lasts a lot longer for the leather. So moving on to the leather. I don't have any problems with this leather. I think it's a black nubuck. They offer different ones. They offer synthetic. I don't know why anybody would go with the synthetic. And then they offer a suede one. I usually prefer nubuck just because it's a stronger leather than suede. Suedes typically dry out pretty quick and need special treatment, but when they dry out, they also typically seem to purge the oils a lot faster than others. Nubuck's kind of sanded down to this matte finish, so it's kind of like a very hairless design, but it does seem like, because I don't know, maybe I'm just making stuff up here. So, I feel like it's like a very light napped of a hair layer though, but it's kind of the stronger part of the leather here, whereas the suede would usually be, it's like this is the flesh side there, would be, actually, man, I'm mixing it up. I'm having a Monday. But this is the weaker side of the leather here, this kind of furry part, whereas this is the stronger part, but it's just sanded down different than a full grain. You know, whereas a full grain, they usually don't sand it down. All right, we're going to stop this monotone, or this monologue. But yeah, no, I have no problem with the leather. Have I even scratched it in a way that... I mean, because it's got a lift here and it's got this great toe bumper, I really just... I don't think I've had anything I could complain about in regards to the leather. But the one thing... Are we going to do it? Yeah, we're going to get into it. Is these are unbelievably not breathable shoes. I think maybe if you were barefoot and walking around in these, you might be able to get rid of some of the like trapped sweat that gets in the front end. But I've tried several pairs of socks, and if it's above an 80-degree weather, it's kind of miserable with these shoes. And I'm not even talking about standing in the sun and letting your feet bake or anything like that either, or like high activity. This is a situation where this footbed here works really well with the sandals, but it doesn't work as well with the clogs. So if you're in kind of a temperature controlled environment, like if you're in a hospital or something, I think these would be totally fine. But I think outdoors, I don't think that breathability translates very well. Leather already doesn't breathe as well, and this perhaps could be the option where the suede would breathe better, because I do believe that the suede typically runs a few degrees cooler. And generally the way I imagine leather works is that it absorbs a certain amount of sweat and doesn't get, before it gets kind of waterlogged. And then when you take them off, it works for X amount of hours. You take them off and then it dries out overnight, and then you can start over again the next day or two. But because this plastic polyurethane footbed does not absorb anything, it doesn't breathe or anything, it doesn't have an insole, it just traps the water and kind of becomes a bog in that front part of the shoe. So I would say that's a fairly strong criticism for that. Again, you could look at the other options. If I was the designers, I don't know, I probably would consider, because you're already leaving your back heel exposed with these, I would kind of consider doing cuts in the leather, kind of like, I forgot what they're called, but there's a certain type of sandal that uses either like paracord type of stuff for the top that wraps around it, or it's just a bunch of strips of leather. It wouldn't be as uniform, might not even be as durable, but that's like a woven leather, by the way, but kind of like like what the Scottish people wore with their kilts, a brogue, I think is what they would call the traditional one. But yeah, for this one, it just does not breathe very well. And so if you're using it for high activity, or if it's just hot out, it doesn't translate well. But I think if you're using it for colder conditions, it would translate a lot better. And we'll go with that to another pro. These, even though all the criticisms I just made about this polyurethane footbed, it is, I have to say, barefoot shoes are not comfortable to stand on. I almost always have to find outsoles to make them more comfortable for standing around all day. I usually go with this type of wool, or I find a cork type of one to stand around on, and it still doesn't work as well as some like a little heel of a shoe. But ironically, talking about the cork here, these most similarly resemble Birkenstock, Boston. That's what the model is called. I wouldn't even be surprised if that was emulated off of the Boston. And the Boston did use a cork footbed, and Birkenstocks are usually considered some of the most comfortable shoes. But getting to my point, of the barefoot shoes, these have to be the most comfortable barefoot shoes I've had for standing around all day. So I would imagine too, even if you go with the sandal, these are just, they're so comfortable for standing without feeling like your legs are wanting to fall off. So yeah, I mean, for that type of comfort, they're 5 out of 5 for me. And I think we'll get on to the fitment. First, I'll talk about pretty much the strap system here. I have had some of the stitching come loose. Was it on this one? I don't know. But I've had some of the stitching come loose. That's a little disappointing, but it hasn't compromised, or nothing's like detached. The way it works is you have all these hooks, and you can just keep hooking it on the options based on how tight you want it. For example, if you want your foot to slide in easier, you typically loosen this part. And then there's this strap here to tighten it along that way. So usually for this, you don't go the tightest option because you kind of want it balanced because this shifts where your foot will sit in the boot, like the boot, basically like this. I can kind of know when I like hang my legs up if my heel's hanging too much to one side or the other based upon the fit. But it takes probably about a week for me to figure out what the right fit was. and then you just use this to loosen and tighten it, and then it's perfect, and you don't have to mess with it again. I imagine it's the same thing with their sandals, but let me tell you, it is it's a stellar system, and I can see why they didn't change it, because I can't find a better way to get a better fit. I guess that should go to size. I'm a 43 European. I am a size 10 men's US. I think they're usually true to size. I did try my size on these because I didn't read anything they wrote, and I chose wrong. They say to size up one whole size, and that's what I would recommend doing. I tried wearing the size down for like a couple months, and my heel ended up standing on here, and they weren't nearly as comfortable because this part is more dense here than the foam in that center part there. So I would recommend just going up one size. They do look a little bit goofier. They look like you're wearing more fairy tale shoes, like some German type of clogs, but so be it. So yeah, they're a great fit. The fit, gosh, I guess I'm going to give that a 5 out of 5 too. So what purpose is this for? Again, I kind of already went over that. I would say if you're standing around a lot during the day, if you're like in a doctor's office or you're in a sales clerk, but you kind of need a covered toe, you know, you're cooking even with the mega grip, you get great grip. I'd say that's what they're for. If you're doing something high activity, I would highly consider looking at the sandals instead. Or high activity, or it's just extremely sunny out. So what's the manufacturer's goal? I definitely think, you know, because like I'll say, like if you look at Vivo Barefoot, I would say Vivo Barefoot is for a barefoot shoe. Their focus is durability, function, fashion, and ecological. I'm not super certain if this company is like an ecological one. I mean, I guess if they're offering resoles, that's as ecological as you can get. But I would say they've accomplished the function of this as well as they can. Other than, I would say this shoe, because of the breathability in the front, does feel like it's like a beta version of what it'll be in the future. I imagine at some point there'll be a version 2, and they'll solve some of this problems either by changing the footbed a little bit to absorb more sweat, finding a different material for the upper. Again, it could be the suede, I don't know. Or finding some way to perforate the shoe so that it breathes a little bit better. Because, I mean, like, let's be honest, you're not really going to be going through, like, the thick, wet brush through these without, they're going to get wet. And if you're wearing wool socks, I guess there's not, since wool stays warm during moderate wetness, that's not such a huge problem. But see, it also means you could just find a way to kind of cut out a little bit more to make it breathe a little bit better, hopefully without compromising the durability. So I will say though, you do get, if you think that you're not going to get rocks in here, you do get rocks in here. It's not too hard to just step in the back and then let it slip out. But it definitely does happen. So it's something to note. As I've said with other barefoot shoes, I do really like it when the heel is narrow and the front is wide. The front is wide. I don't have any problems with the width. I'd give the width a 5 out of 5. I mean, I can use them with toe spreaders even and with socks. The heel, though, is a little bit wider than I like. It's a little bit chunky. I mean, because it's this fit, it can rock your heel around quite a bit. So I can see why it exists. There's been one situation where I accidentally stepped on the heel, though, and I tripped myself that way. And I'm usually not a person that trips very often. So that is something to note. And it could be at that point that I was still adjusting the fit. So would I buy these again? $1 million question. I think the price of these ran for like $150. I think I got them during the Clogs giving or something like that. So I got a good deal on them. I'm tempted to say no, but gosh, I don't know. But the fact that you can stand on them all day and they're some of the most comfortable shoes I own. In fact, I think they were more comfortable than Birkenstocks. I would say I probably will keep them for that reason. I'll just have to avoid hot areas with them. So the problem with the hot areas, though, is it wouldn't necessarily like replace Crocs or flip-flops or the sandals that they offer. So those are, or even, well, Birkenstocks, the cork does run pretty warm. So those are kind of the alternatives. I would highly just recommend looking at their sandals or a pair of Crocs if you're looking at other options. So yeah, I'll probably keep them, and I think they're an excellent value, especially the fact that they can be resold. And what's the overall rating I would give them? I want to give them a 5 out of 5 for the comfort, the fit, and the outsole, and the resolability, and the build quality. Seeming from for me so far, again, I'm a little bit worried about the delamination for that, but I have to give it a 4 out of 4 just because, again, I feel like they're still in a beta model. But knowing the company, I feel like at some point they'll end up making some edit to the design, and it'll end up being a 5 out of 5. So that's my opinion.